everyone, and welcome to today's episode on how to real estate. And today I'm going to rant. No, I'm not going to rant. Jill won't let me rant, but we are going to talk about a really important topic, which is timelines. Now, I love it if a buyer comes in and says, "Hey, I'm unrepresented." Completely understand where you're coming from, but if I'm representing the seller, that is not going to fly. And here's why. There are too many issues that will come up, and my fiduciary duty is to protect the seller. And I thought I would just sit here today and discuss what some of those timelines are so that you as a seller can also be aware to protect yourself. If you're not working with me, I don't know why you wouldn't be, but if you're not, it's really important for you to know this. If you are an unrepresented buyer, or if you are maybe new to real estate and want to kind of know what some of those timelines are that you should be mindful of, we're going to jump right in. Okay, so the first thing is, sounds like 101 real estate, but the first thing you have to do is email all parties involved. The title company, if there's a secondary realtor, or the buyer if they're unrepresented, and the lender. Now, that seems like 101, but what happens is a buyer sometimes has no understanding of who actually is responsible for doing that, and they fail to notify their lender or title company, and you're 2 to 3 weeks in, and then find out that the lender has not even started the process yet. I will confess, about 15 years ago, I was running about 130 transactions before I had a full-time assistant and a full-time transaction coordinator. And I called to check on a file, and the lender and the title company said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I had never sent it to them. I called in some papers. We got the deal done. But from that point on, I knew then that I had to be really, really super hyper focused. We have checklists, we have balances, we have timelines where we have to double check to make sure these things are done. So email the lender and the title company and all parties involved. Number 2, earnest money is received, deposited, and the check has cleared. Now, if you're wiring earnest money, super simple, that's great, but we still have to have the wiring confirmation. But if there is a check involved, it has to be delivered to whomever is going to hold the earnest money. It has to be deposited or cashed. I say deposited, but cashed, I guess, is the same thing. And it has to clear. Now, why is that really important? Again, 100 years ago, people don't use checks the same as they used to, but a lot of times, 8 to 10 years ago, it was not uncommon to get an earnest check and then have that check bounce. And believe me, that is a huge, serious problem because the contract is based upon those details. And if it says that the buyer has submitted $500 in earnest, and then that check bounces, that puts them in default of the contract. The second thing that happens with that is, if that was written on the account of the buyer that is in contract, the lender will see that, and that can become a major issue with them being able to qualify for the loan. So lots of issues involved when it comes to earnest money, and that's why it's really important to make sure that you track it, that you're aware of it, that you know when it was clear, and that everybody is on the same page. Okay, the next is confirm the home inspection has been ordered. So if I'm working with the seller, I still want to know if the buyer is doing a home inspection and when that home inspection is. A lot of times a buyer's realtor will just assume that we all know and then call me the day of the inspection and say, "Hey, the inspector is going over." What really and truly should happen is the home inspector, the person who's going to get access to the home and be legally liable for what's happening in the home during that 2-hour period, should contact the listing associate and schedule it so that the listing associate can make them aware of any quirks or issues. Also, as a predominantly listing agent, my concern is I want to know who the home inspector is, who's going to be in the home, what their timeline is, all of that. We've had the situation where a buyer's realtor will send me a text saying, "Home inspection's Friday at 2. Then later I find out that it was Uncle Bob who came with his ladder and a screwdriver and basically just left the house in a big mess. So we don't do that anymore. Not allowed. Has to be a licensed home inspector. Yes, you can bring Uncle Bob if you choose, but there's certain things that Uncle Bob can't do because he's not licensed. He can't go on the roof. Who's going to pay for that if he falls off and breaks a leg, right? We don't want that going back on the homeowner, so it's really important to be aware. I'm going to go down a rabbit hole with inspections, so I'm going to pull back a little bit. That'll be another podcast, but make sure that we know when the home inspection is and who's doing it, and that everybody's staying on a timeline. The next is confirm the termite inspection. Our state contracts state that that is something that if you want to know about termites, you need to do it within a 10-day period, or 13 or 15, depending on how you write the purchase offer. A lot of times what happens is the buyer's agent will say, we're going to wait and see if the appraiser requires it. Well, y'all, that's just dumb. That's not the way it's $150 to have a termite inspection. So if you're that tight on whether or not you want to spend $150, that's kind of a red flag. So be aware. Also confirming if the home has a well. Have they ordered the well test? And then depending on the type of loan, if they're going to be required to do a septic inspection. So those are things that can cause massive delays at the end when the appraiser waits until a week to 2 weeks before closing, goes out and then requires a well inspection, a septic inspection, and a termite inspection. So these things can definitely cause delays on the closing. Next is end of the inspection period. Now, why is that important? If the buyer's realtor fails to submit a list of treatment, repairs, and replacements during the designated inspection period, the contract states that that means the buyer is choosing to move forward with the home in its current condition. And that is important to know. And unfortunately, a lot of times realtors are not staying on those dates because maybe they have an actual full-time job, they're a teacher, or they do something else, and they've just lost track of that, or they think that the buyer is handling it. So again, we're taking care of the seller and we're making sure that everybody is aware of those timelines and keeping them on task. Next is confirm that a treatment, repair, and replacement list was submitted and received. We've had it where a buyer's agent will type one up and email it, but for whatever reason, it does not actually get to us. They spelled my last name wrong. There's the system that they use. There's another company out there that has a master it's like an AuthentiSign electronic signature site. And in this, somehow or another, they got my email address wrong. And so about 80% of those realtors send purchase offer or repairs to the wrong email address. And so really the appropriate thing to do between realtors is that when we email something, that we follow up with a text message saying, hey, I've sent that to you. So, but we will also, as working with the seller, and if we have a buyer, we will follow up and make sure that it was sent and received, and that everybody is aware. Next is then confirm that the repair list was actually accepted. Sending it is not enough. It does also have to be accepted, because the majority of our state contracts, and there's about 5 different versions out there, but the majority of them state that if during the designated timeline the treatment, repair, and replacement form is not accepted by both the buyer and the seller, that the contract is void. Yes, Jill. Can you imagine losing a deal because someone didn't sign off on one little document? So that's very, very important. And again, a lot of times people are just not familiar or aware of that. Next is after the inspection period is ended, then we start checking to see if the appraisal has been ordered and paid for, and what is the due date. Now, the reason that's important is a lot of times lenders will say, yes, it has been ordered, but it hasn't actually been paid for, so it's kind of in limbo. That is a massive red flag. One, if a lender has not ordered an appraisal, it's because the lender has some concerns about the buyer. Seller should know that. Two, If the buyer does not have the funds to pay for it or just hasn't gotten around to it, major red flag, because that means you're dealing with someone who maybe is not giving this the gravity of the situation and understanding that there are specific timelines you have to meet it. And then what is the due date? Now, with some government-based loans, such as a VA loan, we don't get due dates. It's kind of like whenever. And that's really hard for us to explain to a seller, but it's important to know we won't always be able to give you a due date. Now, the second part of the due date is if I tell you that the appraiser is coming out on Thursday and I send you a little blurb and I say it's going to take 8 to 10 business days to get the actual results of that, that's the number one question is, will we know the day of? No, you won't know the day of if the appraisal was well. But the second part of that is sometimes the appraiser sends the report to the lender, and then even though the lender has received it, the lender is not the one who signs off on it. So then you have an additional 4 days, 3 to 4 days of like an underwriter or an in-house, almost like a quality control person reviewing that to make sure it's okay. Okay, next is the appraisal acceptable? And are there any repairs? So a lot of times we get that email from the lender saying, hey, we received the appraisal. Okay, lovely, but was it accepted? And again, that seems like such a standard thing, but believe it or not, we've had lenders email us saying, got the appraisal, and we're like, okay, but did it meet value? We're not asking from the seller's side, what did the appraisal amount end up being? Because why? It doesn't belong to the seller, and legally speaking, it's not the seller's business, it belongs to the buyer. But we still need the lender to tell us if it met value. If it didn't meet value, then there's a whole procedure for that. The second thing that goes wrong here, and unfortunately about 25% of the time, the lender misses the fact that the appraiser is calling out some repairs. And if we're working for the seller, we have to know what those repairs are so that we can then negotiate them and or just get them taken care of. Again, very important to avoid timelines because there's some repairs that have to be 100% completed, photos taken, and an appraiser revisits the property. And so again, I had told you a lot of times the appraiser doesn't come out until 2 weeks prior to closing. But then it takes 8 to 10 days to get the results, and then sometimes 3 to 4 days for review. So we're literally 3 days away from closing and find out that there's repairs that have to be taken care of. The issue with that is by then everyone has ordered their U-Haul, started packing, have utilities set up to be turned off, just all of these things that are going to be very crucial to undo very quickly due to a delay. Okay, next, title opinion received. Now, before we even can receive the title opinion, we have to make sure that the title work was ordered by the lender. That's a massive red flag. If you have gotten to the point that the inspections are completed and everybody has agreed, and that the appraisal should have been ordered, that's within the first 15 days, but the title work has not been ordered, that's a massive red flag. Why is the lender not comfortable ordering title work? So make sure that you stay on top of that. Sometimes the issue that slips through the cracks on this is that the lender ordered title issue, but the title company cannot find the abstract and has failed to inform us of that. So by us checking, have they ordered title work? When is the opinion due? Then that reminds the title company to tell us, oh, well, we can't find the abstract, and then we can jump in and run around and make that happen. Okay, Jill, are you with me?
Yes.
You got all, okay. Next is gather utility information. Now, that's more if we're working for a buyer. When we're working with a seller, we gather the utility information when we list the home. But if we're working with the buyer, it's really important that we know who are the utility companies so that the buyer can start the process. Some of these are super easy and you can sign up online and do transfers. But y'all, there's some out there that you have to basically take in a blood test. It's really, okay, maybe Jill's like, no. But it's really, really difficult. It has to be done in person a lot of times and a lot of hoops to jump through. So you don't want to wait until the week of closing or the day before closing or even the day of closing, because then you could end up with disruptive service. And in our market with extreme temperatures, and then most closings are on Friday. So can you imagine the nightmare of being given your keys to your new property and you get there on a Friday afternoon and they've shut all the utilities off? That's right, because if you close that morning, they have the right to do that. So utility information is huge. Next is confirm that the repairs are complete. So we did the inspections, we did the back and forth and negotiated the repairs. Now we need to verify that those are complete. Yes, asking for receipts and photos is great, but we do recommend that you do a walkthrough of the home and not wait until the day before closing or the morning of, unless it was some really minor stuff, right? So like if there was a window broken and you receive a receipt and a photo, and then the day of closing you walk through, I think that's totally fine. But when there's things that are just a little bit more in depth, I think that you either need to go back and re-inspect, or at a minimum go to the home and make sure it was done properly, especially when it comes to wood rot or soffits or paint. You don't want to get there the morning of and find out that they did a really bad job and now everything is going to get thrown out of kilter. Okay, next is termite treatment. Did it get done? So we did the termite inspection during the first 10 days or so, and there were termites or an issue. Did the treatment get taken care of? Now, believe it or not, this is one that falls through the cracks all the time, and that's why we have a checklist. Doesn't fall through the cracks all the time with us, but we see it with other transactions. And the reason is that a lot of times the seller says, oh, my company is such and such, I'll just call them and get it taken care of. Anytime it's left to the non-professionals, there's a really high probability that it's going to fall through the cracks. The other thing that does happen with these service people is they are really busy and they're good at what they do, which is the treatment, but maybe not as great with staying on their emails or something. So it's really important that that we make sure it's part of the checklist and we follow up with everyone and we get the ODAF report, which is the technical report that we need for that. Next is invoices sent to title. So the reason this one is really important is a lot of times when it comes to repairs, rather than the seller making the repair, there will be some kind of a written agreement that in lieu of repairs, the seller will give a $1,700 allowance to the roofer of buyer's choice. So that is not the seller giving the money to the buyer, because that's no bueno. It is the seller paying a third party and it being all taken care of at closing. But I can tell you that this has happened before, and unfortunately, it is very, very painful when it does. The entire transaction closes, and then the new owner says, hey, where's that $1,700 check? And the buyer's agent realizes that it never got sent to title, so it was not on the actual breakdown. Now, you think, how on earth could that happen? Because it's a seller fee, then the buyer's agent would not see that part of the settlement statement, right? So that is how it happens. However, it's still the buyer's agent's responsibility, right? Because it was a buyer credit to make sure that that gets sent to title. Now, what I do and what I've taught the team to do and our transaction coordinator, we do it either way. So it doesn't matter if we've got the buyer or the seller, we're going to be proactive and take care of it. But again, this is not how we do it. This is how, I guess it is how we do it, but how you should be doing it also. Okay, and the next, home warranty ordered. Was the home warranty negotiated? Is it part of the contract? Who's paying for it? Did it get ordered? And did the invoices get sent to the title company? Because guys, here's the thing. The title company only knows what they've received. And if all of this was not negotiated in the original purchase offer, then it's really easy to miss it. The second part is rarely Even the title company has missed a home warranty. So again, it's the realtor's job to make sure those invoices get sent in so that they're part of that settlement statement and all of the money is collected. Mortgage inspection report and or survey. That would be whether or not the survey got taken care of and the mortgage inspection report, which is like a miniature version of a survey. And this is probably one of our #1 causes for delays. The surveyors are so overwhelmed and so backlogged that it doesn't really matter what our closing date is. They are behind, and your closing date is not any more important than the 22 that they have in front of you. So it's really important for sellers and buyers to understand that a realtor doesn't get paid until it closes. So we do want it to close, but in some aspects, especially with the surveyor, we have no control over when that's going to happen. But again, having it on a checklist, being aware of it prior to the day of closing, then we can at least give everyone notice. I actually had to do that just last week. We have a scheduled closing for Thursday, which is 2 days from now. I don't even know what today is. Oh, tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow. And last Thursday, when I was going through the checklist with my transaction coordinator, she pointed out that the survey was still not in. So we contacted all parties and made them aware that we are looking at a 1-day delay. So yes, only 1 day, but that's huge when you have the U-Haul truck scheduled already, you have utilities to be transferred already, insurance to be shut off, internet to be shut off, that's always a big one, and sellers anticipating their money so that they can move it to the next property. So there's so many moving parts, and that's why even one little hiccup can throw the entire thing off. I always think visually, and I need to try to find this, but when I first got into real estate, I saw a poster and it had a really, really long canoe, and it was on the water, and it had like 18 people in the canoe, and each of them was labeled from the buyer, the seller, the buyer's realtor, the seller's realtor, the title guy, the survey guy, the title attorney, the abstractor, the termite. I mean, it just went through everyone. It had everyone listed, and everyone had a paddle or what are they called? An oar. Everyone had an oar. And then there was the person at the front. And I do think it was like the listing agent. And the listing agent said, okay, at the count of 3, row. And then the next photo was everybody's oars were just like all over the place. And then they were like, okay, everybody come back tomorrow and we'll try again. And that is so true. Trying to get everyone to row at the exact same time takes a lot of practice, but having these timelines and checklists are just super, super crucial. Then the reviewing the settlement statement is probably the last one. We have some other things on here that are really more specific to our clients, but reviewing the settlement statement, again, this is something that when I first got into real estate, no one taught me to do that, and I would just waltz right into the title company and see it for the first time. Huge, huge mistake. What we do is we ask for a preliminary when we're working with a seller, so we know what their net sheet is from when they went into contract, and then what the actual settlement statement is going to look like. Even if it's a preliminary, when you're working with a seller, it's only going to change a couple of dollars based upon delays, because your taxes would be the only thing that changed, and that's based upon what day you're closing or proration of taxes. So having that, and we can say when we list your home that based upon what you accept, your net to seller will be on the day of closing, we're going to be within $300 of that, as long as it's not some fee that you failed to tell us about, like you don't owe Uncle Sam some money, that you were wrong about your payoff, that the HOA dues you have not paid in 4 years, all of those crazy things. So, those are the checklists. And the reason I like to do these types of podcasts is a lot of times a person says, oh, I can sell the house myself, because they have no concept of how many moving parts and the things that can go wrong or steps that you can miss that could cause massive delays. So I hope that this was informative and that you weren't bored to tears. If there's any other topics you would like for us to cover, please don't hesitate to reach out. As always, please like, follow, and share. And again, thanks for joining us today, guys. Bye-bye.